Okay, so welcome to the our Earth Day election debate. Thank you very much to all our speakers for joining. We had a couple of apologies, which I'll mention shortly, and as I say, we're recording this, so this will be available for everyone to view afterwards. Just a couple of introductory remarks. As I think everyone knows, Transcoco's local environmental group, we've always been apolitical. We've worked constructively with all local councillors for well over a decade now, and we will continue to do so with whoever of you is elected on May the 6th on local practical projects about sustainability in the local Corsham area. But we're taking this at a slightly larger perspective tonight, looking at broader environmental and sustainability issues, and particularly climate change, which absolutely isn't a party political issue, as I think we're seeing increasingly in the debate that's happening, including in today in the summits that have been the US summit. And I just want to quote something actually from that summit. If we actually want to stop climate change, then this must be the year in which we get serious about doing so. Now, that wasn't Greta Thunberg or David Attenborough, and certainly wasn't me, it was Boris Johnson today at the US Climate Summit. And I think that sums up a message that we hear from many politicians, and we certainly heard very strongly in the Wiltshire Council leaders debate that we hosted, Wiltshire Climate Alliance hosted, which I chaired last week. So we see from these announcements that the UK government has just announced a binding target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 78% by 2035. The US has announced some ambitious targets, other countries have as well. And at that debate last week, at bringing it down to the Wiltshire level, there was a very clear consensus amongst the leaders of all the four parties represented, and from the independent who was represented, that there's a need to act urgently and decisively on climate change, with the speakers agreeing unanimously that climate change was the top priority for Wiltshire Council. So if, going back to the Boris Johnson quote, if this is the year, then this must be the election in which we get serious about climate change. And the debate is no longer about whether to act on it or even really when to act on it. The debate really is about how to act on it. And if anyone's got any doubts about what this has got to do with Wiltshire, or let alone Corsham, the point is, yes, we need national and international action, but local authorities have a really crucial role to play in delivering the UK response, because they're responsible for so many decisions that affect emissions, from housing to transport to land use to commercial industrial projects. And I'm sure we'll touch on a lot of those topics tonight. And the councillors who were elected on the 6th of May across the whole of Wiltshire, and particularly the four from our area, will be responsible for delivering on the climate emergency for Wiltshire. And if we don't take meaningful action in the next 4 years, the term of this next council, it's just going to be too late to deliver on those targets for 2030 and beyond. So you guys, if you're elected, that's your job. You've got to play your part in delivering this. So I really hope you're ready for that role. After the leaders' debate last week, I came away, and I hope everyone else who saw it came away with a very strong sense that there is a cross-party consensus on dealing with this. There may obviously differences in emphasis, in approach, but there was absolutely no doubt about the urgency and the agreement on the need to treat it as a top priority. The climate emergency is urgent and deadly serious, and all your party leaders agree. So let's put aside our political differences and just get on with it. So I'm intending to chair this debate as impartially and fairly as I can, and I hope all speakers will engage constructively in the same spirit and will listen to each other respectfully and not interrupt, and only speak when you're asked to do so by the chair, if that's okay, and keep yourself muted except when we're speaking. The members of the audience, please stay on mute, but do submit comments via the comments button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll pick those up. Christine will be looking at that, and if you've got any comments or questions you want to ask the candidates, just put them in there and we'll try and pick those up. Right, so just in terms of apologies, couple of candidates, so Patrick Holliday, who's the Conservative candidate for Corsham Without, isn't able to be here, but he's given me a statement to read out in terms of the introduction. We did ask him to provide written answers to the questions, but he declined to do that. Sheila Parker, who's the Conservative candidate for Box and Cullen, again can't be here, but she's provided a introductory statement and answers to the 5 questions, which are the core of the debate. Steph Driver, who's Labour candidate for Corsham Pickwick, unfortunately just got quite ill today, and so she gave me last minute apologies. And Tina Johnson, who's the independent candidate for Corsham Pickwick, was up lambing all night last night, and so hasn't got the energy to attend tonight, which was the most original reason I've ever heard for not attending a Zoom meeting. So great to hear that. Right, so without further ado, we're going to get into the introductory statements from each candidate. So what we asked for here was for the candidates to give a very brief 2-minute, and I will keep you to 2-minute, statement of your personal view on the urgency of dealing with climate change and biodiversity loss, and what you would do to support action on these issues if you're elected. And I'm going to take everyone in alphabetical order, and then we will rotate round as we go through and answer the questions in turn. If that's okay, just to sort of keep it fair. Right, so I'm just going to get my timer up. There we go. So, and if you could just, when you introduce yourself, just say your name and party and which ward or division you're representing, that will just help people know who you are. Okay, so I'm going to start and say in alphabetical order. So I'll be starting with Declan Baisley. Off you go for your 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Declan Baisley and I'm representing Corsham Without in the County Council election as a Green Party representative. I wanted to give members of my community the opportunity to vote for the most climate conscious party on the ballot paper, because it's easy to feel unheard and ignored when all the major parties aren't listening properly to the terrifying data that's been presented by scientists about how serious the climate crisis is becoming. In my opinion, and I'm sure many of your opinions too, not nearly enough work is being done by the major parties to avert catastrophe. The Green Party are the only ones who will take a radical enough approach to prevent a looming disaster. This is the single most important issue that humanity has ever faced, and this is your opportunity to vote in a climate-conscious candidate who will be the voice of green-minded people in your area and open up a channel of communication for you to raise your environmental concerns. Gloomily, this could be our last opportunity to prevent destruction. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, predicted in 2019 that we only had at most 12 years to prevent runaway climate change from irreversibly altering the world as we know it. There is no more time to lose. In my short politically minded life, I have been nothing but frustrated at the lack of acknowledgement of the seriousness of this emerging catastrophe, this global humanitarian crisis, and I've decided to put my name forward to steer our council into the right direction. I want to ease our community's collective eco-anxiety. I know a lot of people like me feel an existential dread at the thought of this rapidly approaching menace. It's easy to feel like it's completely out of your control and get overwhelmed by the hopelessness of it all. Well, I want people to feel a little less powerless, to know that their concerns are heard and that there is a councillor fighting for them on their green issues. I'm standing in this election because I'm sick and tired of dithering, hollow promises from our politicians and council representatives, and I know I could do a better job of negating an existential threat that we will all face. If you have no mouth and need to scream, then give me your vote and let me be your voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Declan. Right, next I would like to ask Helen Wiltshire to speak.
Thank you, Adam. I'm Helen Wiltshire. I'm the Lib Dem candidate in Corsham Pickwick. I don't know if you, like me, have been watching Ada Patan's new series on BBC Two on Sunday evenings. In that short series so far, he's shown the devastating impact of climate change worldwide, from disappearing islands and bleached coral reefs in the Pacific Ocean, rapidly shifting river streams in Bangladesh, to the disappearance of glaciers in the Himalayas. It's sobering stuff, and there has been a devastating impact on those who live there, which Ade has shown very clearly. We've seen our climate change too, with weather patterns getting stuck as the jet stream in the Atlantic weakens. We're getting harsher winters and wetter summers. And while we may be enjoying our third week of April sunshine, remember that April used to be associated with relentless showers. Now, all of this creates problems for things like growing crops, not just domestically, but for agriculture as well. It's meaning large-scale agriculture is having to look at steps which may well be to the detriment of biodiversity, and loss of biodiversity is every bit as important as climate change. Climate change is the biggest worldwide issue facing our generation. As Declan's just said, the clock is ticking, and it has been for quite some time. There isn't much time left at all before we see irreversible changes which will damage all of our lives. I've been a fan of renewable energy for years. I had solar panels on my last house, and I was fortunate enough to afford to install panels and a battery on my current house. After sunny days like today, we don't usually draw anything from the grid until the next morning. And if it's sunny again, the pattern repeats. And the cost savings have been dramatic. But it's not that for me. It's knowing that we are minimizing our impact on our environment. And my personal experience tells me now, storage of generated electricity is key. So I want to see mass rollout of panels and batteries on all council properties as soon as possible.
Okay.
Yeah. We need to protect green spaces, and we need to address fuel poverty.
Slightly over time. So I'm going to be very strict with time because we have got a lot of people to get through. So Phil Chamberlain next, please.
Chair, thank you, and greetings to everybody on the call, other fellow candidates and those who are dialing in as well. Thanks to Transcoco for hosting this. It's great. I know the work that they've been doing over the past decade has been key in keeping climate and sustainability at the forefront of the agenda, and all credit to their work and power to the future. And as I sit here with the blue skies outside and not April showers, and you have the feeling of spring is in the air, I think there's an opportunity here for hope for a new start, and not business as usual. Over this past year, many of us have been reminded about what we truly value, and how to think differently about how we live and work. And the Green Party wants to learn the lessons from the pandemic, not repeat the failures of the past. So if it's elected as the Green Party candidate for Corsham Ladbroke Ward, I want to spend the time while elected looking to pay back and think about how we can pay back on those people who supported us during the pandemic, and the areas that we came to rely upon. The fact that we had to rely upon broadband so many can keep working. We use the footpaths and bridleways to good for our physical and mental health. We had underpaid and non-union delivery staff, helping to make sure that we were kept connected. We relied on the NHS service. And these are all parts, I would suggest, of climate change, because they're about where our priorities are and where we think a sustainable future can lead us. So I think there is a message of hope for the Green Party. And I think with spring being here is a time for us to think about ways of making for a more sustainable future. That means about getting freight off the road and onto rails. It means about delivering fast broadband so we can support remote working. It means not wasting money on pointless road schemes and not rolling over developers, but ensuring we have existing homes are made sustainable and energy efficient. The council's green tinge is only minor, and I think the green voice within the council chamber can have an enormous impact. And I urge you to make sure we have that green voice in the chamber. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Alan, can I call to you next? And if you are able to put yourself in video, that would be great so we can see you.
Sorry, I've got terrible bandwidth on. I will try my best. There you go.
Great.
It's working.
Excellent.
Okay. With regard to climate change, I've got absolutely no idea about it whatsoever. It's not my form of interest, and what I must do is listen to other people. I can take on, I can pontificate and pretend I know what I'm talking about, but I don't. So my concern is local issues, and my concern is essentially local ways of improving the environment. But as far as global issues go and the expertise, I have none. So it's pointless saying any more than that. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, that's very honest.
Well, it's true. I don't.
It's great.
I'm not going to make it up. It's pointless to just make a fool of myself.
It's not a criticism. Absolutely not a criticism. Right, I've now got a statement from Patrick Holliday, who's the Conservative candidate for Corsham Without. I will read it out, and I will set myself also a limit of 2 minutes to read it out. So here we go. First, I want to start by demonstrating the commitment of me and my party through our actions, not our words. Wiltshire was declared the most climate-friendly council in England by Friends of the Earth because of our work. We've already reduced the carbon emissions of Wiltshire Council by 80% since 2015. We have a nation-leading, fully costed plan to retrofit all our council housing to an EPC-B rating, which will save carbon and reduce fuel poverty. All our new council houses are being built to a zero carbon standard. We're replacing all the streetlights in the county with LED bulbs. This will save almost 2,000 tonnes of emissions and save the council nearly £2 million a year. We've taken action not in a knee-jerk fashion, but by looking at the problems, working out solutions, making sure they're funded, and only then putting them into place. So what would we do over the next 4 years if re-elected? We will deliver a climate strategy designed to help everyone in Wiltshire reduce their carbon emissions, giving them the information and support they need to make their houses more efficient to run, supported by a retrofit industry will grow through the Council House Retrofit Programme. We will provide a green-blue infrastructure plan, which in combination with the revised local plan will protect our environment and wildlife. We've already started promoting native local wildflowers to grow our verges. Otters have recently been seen playing in the Avon and Salisbury and will continue to give nature space to coexist with us. Where we have to build houses, we'll make sure mitigation is provided for nature and our wildlife. New housing must be built to a zero carbon standard, and we work with government to make sure that legislation allows this, not something the council controls, but something we all need to deliver. We will put significantly more resource into tackling fire tipping and littering which blight our countryside and harm wildlife. We will maximise renewable energy generation through both planning and on the assets that the council owns. We'll put a plan in place being developed at the moment to deliver a network of electric vehicle charging points across Wiltshire. This will take years to deliver and require central government funding along with huge improvements to grid capacity, and we need to be ready to achieve it. I'll stop there because that's the 2 minutes are up. Nearly got to the end of it. I hope I wasn't gabbling too much there, that you got the gist of that. Brilliant. Next up is Ruth then for your 2 minutes.
Thank you, Adam. I believe that not only is climate emergency real, but it's also urgent and affecting us now. We need to tackle not only the effects, but the root causes before it's too late. The actions that many of us have taken thus far have been easy. Recycling, cutting back on the use of single-use plastics. We could pat ourselves on the back for having done our bit for the planet. These things aren't insignificant, but they are insufficient. It is time for more difficult decisions to be made, and not just by individuals, but by the organisations and authorities which govern our lives. Soft words and platitudes won't do. The environment and biodiversity needs to be at the core of decision making. This is not without its difficulties. As with everything else, there are competing pressures. The housing shortage, a largely rural community which makes a lot of traditional public transport systems economically unviable. Central government policy in many areas. But we cannot just hold up our hands and say, it's too hard to change, and carry on doing the things, the same old things, with unsurprisingly the same results. There needs to be a two-pronged approach to addressing this. The first is to embed within all our policies at County Hall measures that we know will bring about necessary changes. In planning, ensure all new houses and commercial developments are zero carbon. In transport, ensure an integrated system. In infrastructure, build cycleways and footpaths and maintain those that already exist and develop our rail links. Energy use, the council estate needs to produce renewables and switch to energy saving solutions. The second prong is to work closely with and support both morally and financially the community and experts in the field to provide local solutions for local issues. And where they prove successful, roll them out across the country.
Sorry.
I was just about to say something very nice about Transcoco then. Do you want to stop me?
I will stop you. I'm sorry. I'm being fair and impartial to all candidates.
Yeah. I was just going to say how much I've enjoyed working with you since your inception.
Very kind. Thank you, Ruth. Ray Labar next, please. Where is Ray?
Yep, that's me.
Let's see. Okay.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks to Transcoco for putting this debate together. I'm Ray Lavar. I'm the Conservative candidate for Corsham Ladbroke. I retired from the army after 35 years and I've lived in this area since 2007. I've been a town council for the past 4 years, and for my sins, I'm also a local magistrate. As per my election material, the environment is one of my key priorities, and I'm proud that Friends of the Earth has recognised Wiltshire as the most climate-friendly council in England. If elected, my emphasis will be on protecting biodiversity and reducing habitat loss by preserving Corsham's green spaces and challenging overdevelopment. Widespread introduction of 20-mile-an-hour zones to protect cyclists and pedestrians, reopening Corsham train station to reduce local traffic congestion, expanding and improving cycle routes and pedestrian walkways, and robustly supporting the Corsham neighbourhood plan at county level. I will also continue to reduce my personal impact on the environment, which includes minimising flying, increased cycling and walking, replacing my diesel car with a low emission petrol one, and maximising all recycling opportunities. In the event I'm elected, I think it's crucial to set an example. Finally, in putting myself forward as a county councillor, my focus will be on Corsham Ladbroke. Just as importantly, I'm not here to make empty promises or virtue signal proposed actions that I'm in no position to influence or deliver. And any proposals I support across all policy areas, including the environment, will need to be realistic, affordable, and appropriate to local needs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ray. Next up is Brian Matthew.
Thank you, Adam, and welcome to Earth Day. We are the first generation to know we are destroying the environment and the last generation with a chance to do something about it. And the council residents of Wiltshire elect on May 6th, just 2 short weeks away, will be the council that either succeeds in setting Wiltshire on the path to carbon neutrality by 2030 or fails. I need not remind you, it was our party, when awoken to the need by Extinction Rebellion just before Christmas 2018, that drafted the motion and successfully argued that Wiltshire acknowledged the climate emergency. The vote tally on that day in February 2019 is worth repeating and remembering. 36 voted in favour, 32 against, and 7 abstained. Which councillors voted in which way is a matter of public record. And great aplomb should be given to Councillor Richard Gamble, the current Wiltshire Council Chair, who by imploring his fellow Conservative councillors to think of their grandchildren, managed to sway enough of their numbers to win the day. It should not be forgotten, however, that 32 of their number voted against the motion and 7, a number of whom are on the current cabinet, sat on their hands and abstained. I do not apologise for raising this party political issue because it is party political. The majority of the Conservatives and Wiltshire Council have, as far as I know, not, for example, filled in the Wiltshire Climate Alliance candidate questionnaire. By their actions, you may judge them. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. I will say that's fine for your personal statement. Please, in the questions that come follow, we're really looking for constructive suggestions about actions rather than knocking the opposition. But right now, Christine's going to read out Sheila's introductory statement. And again, I'll keep you to 2 minutes, Christine.
Yes, this is from Sheila Parker, Conservative candidate for Box and Cologne. First, I want to say how sorry I am not to be with you this evening due to prior commitments. I am committed to doing all I can to help with the climate change and biodiversity loss. And I'm sure Adam will remember a meeting we had when I was the unitary councillor on how to make Box and Cologne self-sufficient and the benefits between solar panel and wind turbines. When discussing climate change, the basic element carbon is often mistaken for carbon dioxide and vice versa. Carbon is the 6th most abundant element on Earth. Carbon is essential to life as it is found in all living beings and at room temperature is a solid and can also be found in various other forms such as graphite and diamond. Carbon dioxide, or CO2, is the chemical compound for 2 oxygen atoms and 1 carbon atom. At room temperature, it is gaseous, and it is a vital gas for life in the atmosphere, since it plays a major role in photosynthesis. However, the CO2 that humans release is the leading greenhouse gas, causing problematic climate change. We must remember that CO2 is a common gas in the atmosphere and is required for plant life. It is a natural byproduct of human and animal respiration, fermentation, chemical reactions, and the decomposition of plant and animal life. Here's the big important thing about CO2, it's a greenhouse gas. That means CO2 in the atmosphere works to trap heat close to the Earth. It helps Earth to hold on to some of the energy it gets from the sun, so the energy doesn't all leak back out into space. If it weren't for this greenhouse gas, Earth's oceans would be frozen solid. Earth would not be the beautiful blue and green planet of life that it is. So CO2 and other greenhouse gases are good up to a point. But CO2 is so good at holding in heat from the sun that even a small increase in CO2 in the atmosphere can cause Earth to get even warmer.
Okay,
sorry,
I'm going to have to.
That's fine.
That was well, thank Sheila for a very interesting science lesson there. I think she got the point out just at the end there. Okay, Derek Walters, next, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Derek Walters. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate for Corsham Without. I'd just like to say that, 40 years ago, as a member of Greenpeace, I would collect money on the streets of London. How naive and innocent we were in those days. We thought it was all about stopping nuclear testing on remote atolls and the slaughter of whales. Only later did we realise the impact of toxic waste, plastics, and temperature change through global heating. We had the warnings from Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth and have not taken them seriously. You cannot treat the world as a toilet to flush away humanity's waste. I completely understand the anger and frustration that has led to Extinction Rebellion. I was with them in 2019 outside County Hall to encourage councillors to vote a climate emergency. However, you might not have seen me because I was the polar bear. Global heating and environmental pollution are the greatest threats to humanity, and all policies and actions should place these issues at the top of the list. Personally, I would like to see a government of national unity and a wartime economy, as the challenges we face are as life-threatening as warfare. And though we are unlikely to get either of those in the short term, we need cooperation between parties to find and deliver the best solutions. I think we need a joined-up approach where solutions to housing need to take into account carbon cost of build along with the carbon cost of heating. We need high-performance fibre broadband to allow for home working where possible and safer routes for pedestrians and cyclists to give an alternative to driving. Electric charging points for vehicles so that we can wean ourselves off the motor car. Planning must look favourably on renewable energy production, and the council needs an officer to aid local communities to build and profit from wind turbines and solar farms. We should look for cooperation from the MOD to access MOD land.
Hey, Derek,
there's no reason why.
There. I hope you nearly finished. Brilliant.
Thank you. I have.
Excellent. Great. So thank you, everybody, for those opening statements. Please, audience, if you've got any comments, just put them into the chat and we can pick those up. Feel free to comment at any time what you think of what you've heard, questions you want people to ask, just go ahead. So we're now going to go into the main part of the agenda. So we've prepared 5 questions on sustainability, climate change and environmental issues, with a bit of an emphasis on local aspects as relevant to Transcoco in particular. And so that all the candidates have had an opportunity to prepare for these questions in advance. And then at the end of that, if we've got time left, we'll open up to the floor and any questions from the audience. But do submit your comments as we're going through. So what we'll do now is Christine will read out the question, which obviously the candidates have seen, and then I'll call each candidate in turn, rotating the order around to give their answers. And then if during that debate, if any candidate wants to come back on points raised by the other candidates, just put your use your signalling on the reactions button like that to raise your hand, and then I can come to you in turn. Okay, right, Christine, question.
Okay, so question number 1 that we asked the candidates to respond to is, how can the current Wiltshire local plan be improved to support decisive action on the climate emergency?
Okay, so the local plan, right. And we're not setting a time limit for your responses, but please try and keep it sort of to the point and succinct. And I will intervene if I feel people are getting a bit off the point. Or okay, so we're starting here with Helen, please.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Couple of quick points. Basically, we should stop building on greenfield sites. So, like the Gladman site is a really stupid place to build. We should start looking at building sustainable new communities. So how that impacts Corsham is that Corsham has been subjected to what's called donutting for a long time, which is basically building outwards from the centre, making the towns geographically spread. And we cannot continue to do that. I raised that at the consultation, public consultation. I've also raised it within the town council. So that's why we need to look at new developments rather than just simply continuing to build out from existing centres. When we're looking at new developments, we need to build in things like green energy production, sustainable energy. We need to look at infrastructure, so not replacing complete reliance on the car to get everywhere, putting pedestrians and cyclists at the heart of traffic schemes, not the car. We need to look at public transport options, so how those are linked. You know, if you look at Copenhagen, Park Place, the 2 new big developments in Pickwick Ward, people can't walk into town from there. So that means we need to look at where do we place, what brownfield sites do we place other infrastructure projects, such as a new set of shops, maybe a health centre or something, if we can get the staffing for it. And the only other thing I will raise is the pandemic has introduced new ways of working. And that's why broadband and internet access, high-speed internet access, is increasingly crucial. So we need to look at extending the broadband network, the high fibre broadband network, which GigaClear and Avon are currently installing, beyond its current boundaries to include the new estates and the villages around the south of the town. So those are the 2. I mean, there are other issues as well, but I'll stop with those 2.
Thank you, Helen. Phil Chamberlain, next, please.
Adam, thank you. In reading the plan, I think I'm going to make a brief comment, and I think that overall it identifies a number of key areas, particularly around transportation. But what it continually has is a sense of fear, is that it puts off decision making and highlights the lack of benchmarks by which you can make further plans. And I think one of the things that by electing councillors with a strong green agenda is you can give that sense of leadership to the development of the local plan. At the moment, it's a series of good ideas waiting for someone else to take action. And I think what it needs is that sense of political leadership at County Hall, which gives trust and skills to the officials at County Hall to deliver on the potential of that plan. If you read it, it quite often says there's not clear about the benchmarks for building in this area. It's going to need national direction. It's sort of palming off in several areas where it should be taking action. I think we can take on that responsibility for ourselves. I think give confidence to officers to be able to deliver on what's possible. I think one of the things the plan at the moment is it lacks a sense of purpose and direction. And I think that's the job of the councillors you elect, is to give that sense of purpose and direction. And I would pick up on Brian's point was you want to look at where people have voted previously to get a sense of how they'll vote in the future, and you'll know clearly about who is going to offer that sense of direction. I think there's lots that is positive about that plan, but it needs confidence and leadership to ensure that it's delivered appropriately.
Okay, great. Alan, thoughts on the local plan?
Muted again. Again, having worked on the Corsham neighbourhood plan, it seems fairly obvious to me that there's a lack of integration at the moment. There's a lack of transport integration, and there's a lack of community integration, which I think is really important. And without those things, you're stuck with the car, you're stuck with increased transport costs, you've got this isolationist approach, which I think has to be avoided. So it's a more holistic view, and the neighbourhood plan at the moment, or the Wiltshire neighbourhood plan, it seems like we've just looked at cars, we've looked at bypasses, we've looked at mass housing, and we haven't actually thought what we're going to do. It seems to me also that we're actually making a huge road that drives out of here, and we're encouraging commuters, we're not encouraging localism, and it just needs to be looked at again. And I would say that dear old Prince Charles and Poundbury would be a far better example. If we to recite a site like that would be a much better way of going about a neighbourhood plan than the incessant, we build a road, we fill in, we build a road, we fill in, because that is not a long-term solution. So it's essentially something like a Poundbury, where we build an entire new community and we link that together, is a far better way than we're doing at the moment. And that is that. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, interesting. Right, next up is Ruth on the local plan.
I am here, Adam. Right, okay. There seems to be in the minds of the current executive a link between house building and development, and this is false. Housing should be demand driven. Since central government has mandated numbers in Wiltshire without any apparent relation to the needs, then we should not attempt to increase the prescribed numbers as the local plan currently does. Decisions on housing type and position should also be made with local needs in mind. Currently, permission seems to be granted without any reference to this. What is actually needed is more social housing and starter homes in Corsham. What seems to be being built are executive homes which do not cater for the locality, encourage commuting and add little to the community. And the preference is for greenfield sites. From a developer's perspective, this is cheaper, easier and therefore more profitable for them. Planning permission should only be granted for those developments that are environmentally sustainable, meet a local need and supported by genuine ecological reports, preferably written by a Wiltshire Council member of staff and not written by consultants paid to whitewash the developer's ecological impact. Our towns, especially Corsham, are not designed to be able to funnel large numbers of new residents from the outskirts into the centre. And so the new developments become disconnected, relying on the A4 to get them to facilities. You'll have to excuse me, my hay fever's playing up. It's time that the preference is given to sensible infilling, conversion of large and disused public and commercial buildings, converted into flats, and the active encouragement of the use of brownfield sites. Actually, I think we also need to be more radical. Our towns cannot continue to be donated by new developments, but we should look at the potential for a new town, one that is built and designed around environmental principles and which relieves the pressure on our market towns. Start from scratch, stop ruining what we have.
Okay, thanks, Ruth. Ray, local plan, please.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, and with my sort of military background, and the question is, you know, can the Wiltshire local plan be improved? And it's really what we would call a straw man or a consultation document. It's very much draft at the moment, and I think it was, you know, a very good thing that Wiltshire Council pushed it out for consultation. And as far as I'm aware, it received many suggestions as part of this consultation process. I mean, I actually sat on the Corsham Town Council meeting on the 8th of March, and we had a detailed discussion on this and came up with a number of recommendations, which I don't intend to read out, but one of the ones that stood out to me was actually the making sure that that houses are actually are constructed now to make them carbon neutral. And I think if that can be done as opposed to building them and then retrofitting them, I think that would be a major and decisive way forward. And the other thing that I think, when this plan is finally agreed and all the consultation is taken into account, that I think it's essential that it is underpinned by a robust and measurable implementation plan. Because in my experience in the military, if it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get done.
Okay, thank you, Ray. Brian.
Thank you. Well, I was going to go back to my submission to Wiltshire Council on the local plan, but I don't want to have too much repetition, and suffice to say, those of you that are aware of the 9 points that were put forward by the Wiltshire Climate Alliance, I'm in agreement with those, and many of them have been mentioned already, so it just shows what a great bunch of people we've got tonight that are speaking. What I will talk about though is a 10th point, which I added, and what I've said here is, where houses have to be built, consider two options. Firstly, along the lines put forward by Princess Anne in February 2014 in her speech to the English Rural Housing Association. And she suggested that small numbers of affordable and social housing should be built in every village and linked with neighbourhood plans. Secondly, the point that's actually already been raised is this issue of new towns to be considered where there is employment and also need for housing. And an example of such an area is the land to the north of Junction 17 on the M4 and east of the village of Hallavington. This would benefit from employment opportunities from the Dyson Works at Hallavington, as well as the new industrial zone to the south of Junction 17. There are also excellent communication routes with the M4, but also the A350 and the mainline railway station, which passes through the old Hallavington stop, which could be reopened as a station. Furthermore, if this land is acquired by compulsory purchase, it would allow for the building of the necessary infrastructure in advance. And this has been one of the big problems that Wiltshire has faced, where it's dealing with land banking by the large housing conglomerates, which means that when you start off, you know, you're absolutely barking up the wrong tree, because the cost of the houses, the cost of the land is prohibitive. So that's my, if you like, my addition to what everyone else has said. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Right, Christine, would you just read out Sheila's response?
Yeah. So Sheila Parker's response is, I'm delighted that Wiltshire Council have already reduced the carbon emissions by 80% since 2015, and that new houses must be built to a zero carbon standard. When I was a unitary councillor, I suggested that Wiltshire Council should encourage all large developments to fit solar panels to their houses, and I provided a list of improvements for new building for elderly people. I hope that the retrofit to save carbon dioxide and reduce fuel poverty includes my previous suggestions, and I will be pushing for this to be taken forward.
Okay, it's just a factual point. I mean, she said that new houses will be built to zero carbon standard, but as I think pretty much all the councillors know, that's not currently in the local plan. It could be. They have the power, Wiltshire Council has the power to put it in the plan, but it's not currently a requirement. At the moment, they're only building new council houses to zero carbon standards. So just a factual point there. Derek.
Right, reading the question, I thought the first thing was decisive action. And the decisive action that I would make is, first of all, is I would say no to the Eastern Bypass, and in fact no to new road building unless a real proven need is demonstrated, and I mean a real need. I would also say no to 9,000 new homes in Chippenham on greenfield and floodplain. And also what I would say there is that it's all very well to talk about zero carbon housing, but actually that's the consumable by the time you've actually built the house, you've already consumed a lot of, there's a lot of carbon emission involved. As soon as you talk about concrete, anything with cement in there, you know, you've got big costs up front. And of course, as soon as you do things up front, you're going to pay the cost because over the time frame. So I would say, first of all, those are the decisive actions that I would take. I know that wouldn't be terribly popular with some. I agree entirely with a number of the candidates here who've talked about a new town. I think that's a very good idea because it can be custom built. I think we should investigate using alternative materials that reduce the amount of carbon within the build. And I think it was also interesting, the fact that a lot of people were actually from different political backgrounds were all on board with that. I think that you know, this town would be, as we've all talked about before, cycling, pedestrians. It'd be built for people rather than cars. I would, and I think basically I would basically make planning such that the building of wind turbines and was something that basically we relaxed rules on that. And I think what would be interesting is knitting that together, for example, getting investment from outside private funding platforms like Abundance to build things like wind turbine linked to green hydrogen production, and looking at running local transport, you know, buses and so on hydrogen, the hydrogen fuel cell, and looking at that. But of course, these are things that are all a bit out there at the moment. We're not quite sure how things are going to pan out, but it's worth keeping your eyes open and seeing what can be done. Okay, thank you.
Declan, finally.
Well, like most of you have said, I think the main issue that needs to be addressed is changing how we currently view developments. We need to change the criteria for new developments to encourage protected areas for natural habitats within them. Why do we exclude nature from development sites? We should make sure that for every square kilometre of land used for houses, there is a corresponding square kilometre used for nature, space that can be used for allotments, parks and wildlife habitats. People love having nature on their doorstep, so let's make sure it's welcomed by giving it a home next to ours. There's a growing crisis for young people attempting to get on the property ladder. It's important to build new homes, but let's turn a new leaf and set an example for other countries to follow. Let's build energy efficient homes that encourage sustainable living. New homes always need to be built with energy efficiency and sustainability in mind. We should also look for ways to make currently existing homes and businesses more energy efficient by offering better insulation to those currently without it. Only by building sustainably can we eradicate this problem forever. It's no good looking for temporary fixes to our current problem. We need to rapidly change the way we think forever. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Declan. So it sounds like, actually, interestingly, at least of the people sort of contributing tonight, all saying pretty much that a lot more work needs to be done on the local plan, particularly around housing and transport, which is interesting because I hope, you know, those who are elected actually take that forward then.
Yeah.
Looking at the questions. Yes, Christine, sorry. Yeah. We've
got a couple of comments starting to come in, Adam, and Andrew is saying that he can hear lots of agreement from everybody, but he hasn't heard anything about domestic heating yet. I think these comments maybe will come out later in the discussion, but also something that the candidates might want to think about. Andrew also says about he hears nothing about changing the behaviour of councils and how they work and how they form partnerships with different people. So that could be an interesting addition to questions. And Richard is saying that Wiltshire Council are very good at designing bypasses and filling in. They're not good at building active travel infrastructure, linking communities, etc. So again,
way into the next
that's question. A good link. Yeah, absolutely.
Any other comments from any of the other candidates want to comment on anything they've heard from the other candidates? Are you all in violent agreement with each other that the local plan needs to be reviewed and improved? Sounds like. No? Okay. Right. So the next question, as we mentioned, is about transport. So Christine, over to you.
Yeah. So this links in nicely to Richard's comment. Question 2 is, what would you do to support greener transport, cycleways and pedestrian access in our area?
Okay, so we'll start off this time with Phil Chamberlain, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think there are a couple of bits here about planning for the future and also about looking back to the past. And one of the things I've been interested in seeing is the slowways movement, which is looking about linking up by pedestrian access so that you're able to shop and socialise and live on a local basis. And I think that the Corsham area could benefit from picking up on some of the ideas that that movement is developing in terms of being able to open up access, restoring lost footpaths and bridleways, opening up access to land so that we're able to give ourselves some better footfall, not just for exercise and for shopping as well, but also for good for mental health. And then in terms of forward planning, it's quite clear that electric is going to be quite dominant, and how that's delivered is going to be crucial. I think probably putting in electric charging points has some benefits, but we'd like to see a revolution in battery design coming up. And so there needs to be, I think, a skilling up of officers and bringing in expertise within the council so that we can build in an infrastructure which allows us to take advantage of what we expect to see a real revolution in electric vehicles, and we're able to take off much of the pollution that's caused by the current reliance on large vehicles to move goods and people around. There is a whole area, I think, around Wiltshire where communities suffer from being isolated just by a very small lack of connection, if you like. It's not about creating huge sort of new networks. Actually, I think it's a series of very small connections to make sure that we're interlinked in a better way. And if I hear another sort of promise about the opening of Corsham Station and it not coming through, I'm really going to give up, because I'm just extremely tired of saying that. Let's kind of make it happen rather than talk about it.
Yeah, that's been around for a long time, that one. Right, Alan, transport and greener transport, please.
Now, 1 second. So I've got terrible connection here. Right, basically this is one thing I do know about, thank God for that. So if we can start with safe cycling, as an electric bike user, it's my main form of transport. I'm very aware of the necessity of improving bike safety. I propose a reclassification of Eastern Lane as a restricted byway to improve cycling pedestrian connectivity between Chippenham and Corsham. And I've been working with Wiltshire Highways to ensure that all our cycle lanes connect. There are places in Chippenham and Corsham where they just do not work, and it's dangerous. So it's just a reconnection. I've also, one of the other main concerns I've got is the safety of pedestrians, and it's been severely compromised by the speed of traffic, lack of crossings, width of pavements and connecting paths. And this is something I'm actively working on, because without the connection, you've got no integration whatsoever. You've got islands of people and there's no connectivity, and it doesn't take a huge amount of work to put islands between roads and reduce speed. I'm working again with the introduction of 20 mile per hour in the town centre, and I'd want to put in a 30 mile an hour running through the entire boundary of the town from Bath Road, Bradford Road, Park Lane and Valley Road. We have to get the speed down. The other thing I've asked to do is to stop the HGVs going down Pickwick Road, and I've applied for the monitoring of HGVs going down Pickwick, and I think we have to stop it, because again, we've got lorries going down, but it's compromising safety. People aren't going on people aren't going on their bikes, and it's frankly dangerous. I have been working closely with Paul Johnson of Transwilts and Wiltshire Council about how we might introduce an on-demand bus service, which hopefully will be electric or hydrogen. And it's essentially a small fleet of buses which will be running on between Corsham, between Chippenham, between the outlying villages, and we will be tying it up so we've got the timetable of Chippenham railway station with the buses, so it all works integratedly. The railway station is taking forever, and the reason is we have problems with getting the trains to stop. So we could have a railway station, but unfortunately at the moment, as far as I'm aware, GW are applying for the franchise and they cannot commit to stopping the trains at Corsham until we actually know what's going on in the future. So in theory, the station there, Wiltshire Council wants to make it happen, but it simply will not happen until we get integration with the train service. So we've got the on-demand buses, better cycling, obviously, and improving pathways. That's essentially what I'm interested in.
Thank you. Ruth, transport.
I've got a terrible signal.
Don't worry, you can go back.
I'm sorry about that, Alan.
That's all right, Ruth.
Let's go on mute now. Okay. There definitely needs to be better connectivity between our settlements. In many cases, this is actually building on what we already have. We've got a large number of unadopted footpaths. These need to be adopted and converted to joint use cycle and pedestrian ways. For some of the more rural locations, then the quieter lanes should be designated cycle routes. Bus companies need to be encouraged to adopt electric vehicles, and this can be done through Wiltshire Council grants and subsidies. And there needs to be joined up thinking about routes and timings, and this can be done through negotiation. The adoption of electric hybrid cars should be encouraged. I think we can probably all agree with that. But many of our town centre properties do not benefit from off-road parking, which inhibits the opportunity to use electric recharging at home. Currently, we have a very large, underutilised long-stay car park, which residents are deterred from using due to the extortionate price of a season ticket. I would and have pushed for these charges to be either abolished or greatly reduced. This would not only improve road safety and air pollution with cars cruising around to find a place to park, but would also give the opportunity to install significantly more charging points, easing the way for residents without off-street parking to switch to electric vehicles. For us in Corsham, the most significant improvement would be the opening of the railway station. I find it absolutely staggering that Wiltshire Council does not have a strategic rail policy, nor has any intention of formulating one for at least 2 years. This, in my opinion, should be the #1 objective in this area for the county. Railways are the greenest way to provide mass public transport. Since tracks are the least flexible piece of infrastructure, we need to get our rail policy right in the first place, then adapt bus routes, timetables, and potential road improvements to fit round that. But the first thing, and that obviously everybody in Corsham knows about the ongoing saga of the railway station, but that is definitely where we should start. And I know Phil and I have both, Phil Worley, who's on this call, and I have both been to see the current cabinet member, and I'm sure Phil will have a different take on it, and I'm not going to ask him for that, but actually I was despaired. And that is something we need to focus on. Deal with the rail policy and then fit things around that so we get people off the roads as a priority.
Okay,
That's
thank
all
you.
I've got to say.
Ray, please. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, over the last 4 years, really, as a town councillor, the 20-mile-an-hour limits throughout Corsham have been one of my priorities, and that will continue to be a priority of mine if elected as a county councillor. I'd also like to consider expanding the current pedestrianisation and one-way systems. And I know this is a bugbear of many people in Corsham. I'd quite like to look at creating parking exclusion zones around schools, so that the number of people taken to school by car or children is drastically reduced. I totally agree with Wiltshire County's proposals that we should have footpaths and cycleways to link with existing communities, and I would really like to explore that and to see if we can put that in as soon as possible. And also, let's look at the development of strategic network of cycle links that we can start connecting towns together and encouraging people to use their bikes to commute. I think also that County Council are looking at a more environmental friendly bus service, which is also integrated. And as with Ruth, I think it's a scandal that we don't have a Corsham railway station, and that will continue also to be one of my top priorities.
Thank you, Ray. Brian.
And with that, Adam, I need to now disappear.
Yes.
So you've got my answers to the other questions, if necessary.
Yes, thank you very much, Ray. Yes, I'll have to dig those out. Yes, brilliant. Appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much, Ray.
Yeah. Well, many thanks once again, Adam, for putting this together, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
In my absence. Bye-bye.
Great. Okay, so Brian, come to you next.
Thank you, Adam. Well, I wrote and put forward a motion to full council last summer on this subject. It was defeated. I suppose I'm not allowed to say by the Conservatives, but it was defeated by them. So I would reintroduce this motion, and hopefully with a changed political makeup on Wiltshire Council, we would get it passed. And the motion resolution read that there's been an unprecedented increase in walking and cycling amongst all sections of the population during the COVID-19 pandemic, that a major deterrent to taking up cycling among many is the perception that sharing roads with fast traffic is not safe. And the resolution, if you like, on this was to say that Wiltshire Council highways and planning departments should prioritise the requirements of cyclists, pedestrians and horse riders when planning works on Wiltshire's roads, bridleways and footpaths, and that all planning applications must show clear evidence of integration of safe cycling and pedestrian routes with those of the surrounding street layouts, so that any infrastructure planning by the council should place safe cycling as a high priority and move it up from its current medium priority as set out in the current local transport plan to sit alongside walking. The Wiltshire Council's cabinet further supports these principles by the appointment of 2 czars from among portfolio holders, with 1 for cycling and 1 for walking, to promote and facilitate change to these activities by listening to what area boards, town and parish councils, community cycling and walking, environmental groups have to say to them, and by communicating and developing these ideas with cabinet members for health, transport and social planning, spatial planning. That Wiltshire Council would expand its bikeability programme to all age groups. So at the moment it's just for children, but we're saying from 8 to 80. Or if this is not possible, develop a parallel system for adults, seeking funding from related retail outlets and the involvement of local qualified trainers and cycling groups. Wiltshire Council will review with Sustrans and other cycling, walking groups the digitally available footpath, bridleway and cycle route maps for the whole county. And that Wiltshire Council will, with parish and town councils, consider making widespread provision for theft-resistant cycle parking facilities sufficient to demand, reducing traffic speeds in urban areas, the adoption of auto speed watch cameras, and dual-use cycle footpaths in pedestrianised areas between towns and villages. So that was what we'd said, and that's what I'd like to see go back through. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, Christine, should we give Sheila's answer?
Yes, so Sheila's response to that question is, I remember working on a similar idea with a group of councillors and Transcoco when I was a unitary councillor for Box and Cologne. It was for the Corsham transport plan. I'm sure Adam will be able to confirm that we came up with safe cycleways around Corsham to Skynet Drive. The unresolved problem was how to get the route from Corsham to Box and Cologne. I would be happy to support cycleways and pedestrian access if suitable routes can be found and implemented. I would also support a joint pedestrian cycleway from Corsham to Chippenham. I fully approve of Wiltshire Council actions of installing vehicle electric points in all of their car parks around the county and support their plans for delivering a network of electric vehicle charging points across Wiltshire. I believe the bus companies are also looking at changing to electric buses, which is a very exciting project.
Okay, yeah, I can confirm that I have discussed with Sheila and the members of the area board. In fact, it's something called Transcoco has been campaigning on right from the beginning of Transcoco, as many of you here will know. Derek.
Okay, I think first of all, whilst I've been out canvassing, one of the the experiences that I get repeated over and over again is people finding that the roads are unsafe both for cyclists and pedestrians. And I've had recent experience of trying to deal with highways over a safety issue on a road, and I realised that fundamentally they view the roads from the motorist perspective and find it very difficult to alter that focus. What I would like to see is I'd like to see road building funds diverted into building a decent cycle network, not just an afterthought, something that basically means to say that people, their first thought is, well, I could use a bike to do that journey. It would make life easier, cheaper, more efficient, make me healthy. We need to put the money in there, and we need highways to alter their way of viewing the road network. Certainly for some roads, and what I would also say is that whilst we try and build the network, we should determine certain roads and make them motorists' guest. They do this on the continent, whereby they sign the road such that the expectation is that the motorist is going to give way to the other road users, not the other way around. I think that we need to have workplace. We need to make cycle storage facilities available, because one of the things that we're particularly finding now with the pandemic is that bicycles are a sought after commodity, and a number of cases of people having valuable bikes stolen, even quite cheap bikes stolen, because there is a market for it. So we need to have storage facilities to make it a going proposition to ride your bike. I would also suggest that one of the things that you could do almost immediately is to basically make any 30-mile-an-hour zone within the town boundary, any 30-mile-an-hour zone becomes 20 during the commuting hours in the morning, particularly for school journeys. And that, what we want to do is to encourage a feeling of safety on the roads, and we're certainly not getting that at the moment. As far as public transport is concerned, what I would like to see is a movement, and I think somebody else has mentioned this already. There's I think maybe Alan actually, a Uber style on-demand buses. Yeah. Smaller buses, and for that can then be something that is both responsive and learning from that. It knows where to put the resources at what times. I have to say, it's not beyond the software developers' capabilities to do that. I certainly encountered elderly women on estates. They could get to the bus stop, they could get the bus into town, they could get the bus back, but they couldn't get to their home with the shopping. We need to be much more flexible here. We need to take away that need for someone to have a car parked on the driveway. And don't forget, that car parked on the driveway is still something that sits there with a lot of carbon content within it in the manufacture process. Just one last thing is, I don't know that we're ever going to get round to the boilers, domestic boilers. Can we tack that up possibly?
Well, that could be in the open questions at the end if we've got time, but we can't cover everything in a single debate.
Understood. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Declan.
I'd like to stop the development of any new infrastructure that expands the already too large fossil fuel transport system. New roads don't ease congestion, they actually lead to more cars on the road. There will be no benefits from the recently proposed Chippenham bypass, only more pollution, more congestion, and significant damage to vulnerable ecosystems. Instead of exacerbating our reliance on fossil fuel transport, Why don't we look into creating cycleways to connect Wiltshire's towns? If people had the option to cycle efficiently and safely, then I'm sure they would readily cut down on using their cars as much, if not get rid of them completely. Cycling isn't just clean transport, it's also incredibly cheap and a great way to stay fit. We would be investing in the health of our community by removing pollution and improving physical and mental fitness. The current cycle lanes that we have throughout the county are inadequate. We need to drastically improve their extent and their quality. Bike lanes to rival Amsterdam should be our ambition. With their raised barriers and between the roads and number of regular commuters, they are the envy of the world. We should also create shared spaces for bikes and pedestrians in town centres, which will in turn create clean air zones. The clean air zone in Bath shows a pragmatic response to fix a serious issue. We need to rapidly transition away from our reliance on cars, so we need to incentivise and encourage people not to use them as much, and we will only do this by giving them a realistic alternative. It is our council's responsibility to give each and every citizen the option to use carbon-free transport. If they don't enable their citizens, then nothing will ever change, except of course the climate. It is their responsibility to encourage a better means of transport for everyone in the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Declan. And finally, on this one, Helen.
Thanks, Adam. I think we need to recognise that not everyone is fit enough or well enough to be able to walk or cycle. So therefore, there does need to be proper investment into public transport options. And that means better timetabling, more frequent services, possibly smaller buses, which run on for later, integrated into other transport outlets. People have mentioned Chippenham Station, so on. And we need to incentivise people to use that public transport, not simply penalise use of private transport. We need to engage with community groups such as Transcoco, because people on the ground very often know their patch extremely well and have very good ideas for how to improve pedestrian, cycling and transport access within their areas. So we need to get better engagement. And actually also, we need to engage better with our neighbouring local authorities. We talked about Corsham Station. We need to work with the other councils along that line from Bristol to Oxford to demonstrate the clear demand for a commuter service, because then that is a case that Great Western or whoever picks up the new franchise will have to listen to. And finally, we need to maintain paths and cycleways. It's not sufficient just to declare them. We need to make sure they're in a good fit state of use or state of repair. So we don't have lots of overgrown paths, fighting through brambles and so forth to try and just walk from one place to another. So those are my additions to what other people have said.
Great. Christine, do you want to pick any points up from the chat?
Yeah, definitely. We've got quite a few comments here. Jane said she likes the idea of the on-demand buses, but having them operate, that in itself won't necessarily get all the public on board. So there are other issues around pricing as well, possibly. Alan's put a link in the chat to an app, information about an app, which is how they're hoping to sort of run that kind of transport system. Penny was saying she was slightly despairing about the fact that it's taken 4 years to get the 20-mile-an-hour zone idea going, or not even started yet. And Alan and Ruth have been offering their comments on that, about how it's been disrupted through COVID, and it relies on evidence from data. So more of that is going to be collected, and they're quite hopeful that that will come about quite soon. And another interesting point is that the policies have to prioritise active travel over the car. This could be unpopular for some people, and so it depends on courageous leadership from people in the council. And there's quite a few comments coming out about sort of council leadership and behaviour of how the culture within a council, but I think maybe we can bring those in later if we've got time in the Q&As.
Okay. Thank you. As I mentioned, pretty much everyone knows that this is something that Transcoco's been working on ever since we started, and I'm very encouraged genuinely by the comments from everybody, and I really look forward to whoever does get elected working with you on the area board to really push this a lot further than we've been able to so far. And we will definitely be holding whoever does get elected to the commitments, or at least the intentions that you have expressed tonight. But thank you for that. That's really, really encouraging. Right, question 3, Christine.
So question 3 is, what can the council do to increase biodiversity and reduce habitat loss in Wiltshire?
Okay, Alan, would you like to kick off?
Yeah, sure. The first suggestion would be to increase the number of classified areas of A&OB and to ensure the legislation in place to stop speculative development. We've got a massive problem with developers looking at empty green space. We haven't got correct legislation and they just jump in on it and turn it into houses. I think this needs to be stopped. We need to encourage future house builders to primarily build on prime sites. And on a county level, I think we need to see landowners, particularly land owned by Wiltshire Council and Wiltshire farmland, to support it to reduce chemical spraying, to reduce nitrogen fertilizer, and have a policy of just simply widening diversity strips, increasing the amount of cultivated land, but not using it as things for maize and inedible crops. I'd also like to see a policy of reintroducing hedges and, where possible, increasing the use of deciduous trees. But essentially, all these things need to be done in the planning stage, because at the moment we are allowing ourselves to be completely run over, and I don't think it's in any way beneficial. And that is that for the moment.
Thank you, Alan. That's great. Who's next? Ruth.
Yeah, thank you. Right, so the key to this is working with farmers. Again, I'm staggered that I haven't in 4 years heard of any constructive engagement with our farming community, except by anecdotal evidence from individual councillors' cronies. But perhaps I've been on the wrong committees. It is increasingly apparent that it's in everybody's interests, including farmers, to change our mode of agricultural production. We need to engage with farmers, both large and small, encourage best practice, and from an environmental perspective, either through direct grants or access and assistance with grant applications, and roll out findings across the county. Sorry, again, I have to excuse my hay fever. Again, I'm not aware that there's been any research into the biodiversity of the county, and this is needed urgently to identify what species are most at risk and where we end up with the monoculture. A lot of our woodland is also under threat of development. The Quarry Woods is a case in point. There should be a presumption against such development. The Corsham area has lots of wide verges, which could be converted to wildflower areas. The current Wiltshire Council grounds maintenance contract takes no account of wildlife and turns our verges into an environmental wasteland. This needs to be renegotiated and a proper environmental management strategy adopted. Of course, road safety needs to be maintained, but as other councils have demonstrated, the two are not incompatible. Plus, it's often cheaper. Tree cover. I believe Wiltshire has some of the lowest tree cover in the country, which for a rural county is surprising. Plus, with the advent of ash dieback and other arboreal diseases, the situation is becoming a crisis. Again, the way to overcome this is by working with the farming community. But even more important is a programme in this context. Even more important is a programme of municipal tree planting. The council owns vast tracts of suitable land, but because trees are deemed expensive to maintain, there is a reluctance to explore the opportunities, and this needs to change.
Okay. Thank you, Ruth. I've got Ray knew he was leaving. He's given me a written answer to this question, so I'll read this out. In my election address leaflet, I stressed the need to vigorously protect Corsham's green spaces while actively promoting local conservation by challenging overdevelopment. To this end, the Corsham Neighbourhood Plan is a great example of an excellent and comprehensive piece of work that I will robustly support at county level. I will also support the Wiltshire Council initiative to complete the Green-Blue Infrastructure Plan, which will ensure wildlife has corridors connecting our AO and Bs National Park and other areas across the county, and the plan to change when verges are cut to allow wildflowers to grow in the spring and summer. Continue to get input, ideas, initiatives and existing plans from town councils such as Corsham, as well as the engagement of environmental pressure groups such as Transcoco is also key to encouraging communities to take responsibility for their local areas. In particular, I will encourage Wiltshire Council to work with Corsham Town Council in its aim to improve the amenity, recreation and nature conservation areas of the Beachfield and the Batters. These two sites with woodland walks are a great example of what can be done to protect and encourage wildlife while enhancing habitat and increasing biodiversity. Well, thank you in your absence, Ray, for that plug for Transcoco. Much appreciated. Right, Brian.
Thank you. Well, again, another policy that I wrote that was voted down by the Conservatives was a policy on tree planting in 2018. Wiltshire is, as we know, currently undergoing a huge amount of new house building, and we believe that Wiltshire Council should consider following the example set by Wickham District Council, which now require developers to plant a minimum of 25% tree coverage by canopy on all new housing estates, and that this should be included in Wiltshire Council's local plan review of its core strategy. We believe that this would help to improve the health and well-being of residents on these new estates in a multiplicity of ways, leading to happier, healthier population. And there's now overwhelming evidence of the benefit of trees to people's physical and mental health, as detailed below. But there's more. Dorset County Council has shown the way with wildflowers planted on roadside verges. This is another no-brainer. It means less cutting of grass, but more intelligent care with grass being cut and the cuttings collected. This slowly degrades the fertility of the soil on the verges, which means less grass, more wildflowers, less need for cutting, more insects and wildlife. And working with farmers, we should try to see best practice so that natural insect predators such as ladybirds flourish and there's less need for spraying with insecticides. Thank you.
Thank you. Christine, Sheila's input, please.
So Sheila Parker says, this is an interesting question. As we are all aware, changes in climate throughout our planet's history have, of course, altered life in the long run. Ecosystems have come and gone, and species have become extinct, and others have been emerged and been discovered. I watched the series on the Nature Museum, and they have a dead beetle that was alive before the Egyptians. It died due to climate change. I believe Wiltshire Council are already promoting native local wildflowers to grow in the verges and mark them as protected verges to keep them safe. Where houses have to be built, they will make sure mitigation is provided for nature and our wildlife. There is also a need to tackle fly tipping, as this is harmful to our wildlife.
Okay, interesting about the dead beetle. Another interesting factoid from Sheila. Derek.
Well, coming in right sort of at the end of this, I've been listening to some really great ideas, and you know, basically you've completely removed all the things that I was going to say in the first place. So I'm going to change it around a little bit and say, you know, what I've been doing, and that has been, you know, I set aside. I've got some. I'm fortunate. I've got a bit of land. I put aside some of it for planting trees bought from the Woodland Trust, and in fact, Adam in fact helped me plant them. But actually, the planting of the trees was the least expensive part of it. The most expensive part of it was putting the electric fence round to keep the deer off from eating them. But anyway, what I'm saying, I'd like to say is that and digging a pond, which I did last year, with the objective being, you know, of basically us individually doing things. So what we could do is to encourage and help to supply individual residents in the county to actually do something themselves. You know, a lot of us, you know, we just go and mow our lawns. You know, we don't need to do that. We could basically create meadow areas and have cut throughs. We could still leave some to be a bit of mown grass if that's what we want. But you know, as a council, we could be an enabler here. Listen to what the various voluntary groups are and get the community galvanised to doing something.
Thank you. In full disclosure here, I did help Derek plant the trees, but that was before he declared himself as a political candidate.
Very true.
Declan.
Hello again. So I think there's quite an easy answer to this question, which people have touched upon. We do need to stop cutting the verges of roadsides and roundabouts. These areas are rarely visited by people, which means they remain perfectly undisturbed environments for insects and small animals if left alone. According to a study undertaken by the Royal Botanical Gardens, the UK has lost a staggering 97% of its meadows since 1945. And that's a truly ghastly figure. It's hard to comprehend just how devastating that's been for the animal kingdom, and worse still, how close we are to losing these ecosystems forever. If we lose the bottom animals for the food chain, such as insects and mice, then larger animals higher up cannot be supported. Native wildlife for the UK is in complete crisis. There is so much to do, and we needed to start yesterday. We should be building flower beds on the roadsides to bloom with wildflowers every year. We should build beehives on roundabouts where they will never be disturbed by pedestrians, just so they can exist by themselves to help the countryside be pollinated, without having to pay a tax of honey for the privilege. We should be putting birdhouses up in every tree, in every park, to encourage them to live among us, to give them shelter in the complicated concrete jungles we've forced them to reside in. If we don't give nature a home within our community, then it will disappear. The city of Rotherham stopped cutting its roadside verges in 2013 and has reportedly saved £23,000 a year. And that's just by not cutting the roadsides and letting them bloom wild, which is obviously money that can be reinvested in their community every year for each of its citizens. They've set an example that many other cities across the UK have now started to take, like Manchester and Sheffield. Let's let them inspire us and improve our beautiful countryside for everyone. Let's keep Wiltshire looking beautiful and let's protect its critically vulnerable ecosystems. Thank you.
Thank you, Declan. Helen, next, please.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, as Derek said, it's really difficult when you're this far down the order to sort of pick up anything new. I think I would agree utterly with Ruth when she said we need to work out where we are and then work out a plan for how we improve it. So a biodiversity survey across the county to determine the current state is crucial, and then consult and look at best practice from other councils, both at home and abroad, on how to improve that. I think the situation as regards bees is appalling, and the council, I think, should be investing in beehives, and Declan just stole that line from me too. We need to look at green corridors for wildlife, and lots of people have talked about wildflowers on verges. And generally looking at that, it goes back to the where we are in terms of biodiversity. Rather than just planting monocultures of trees, we need to look at what varieties of trees we need to in different areas, and what varieties are suited to different areas. So we're not just seeing, oh, we've planted X thousand trees and they're all Douglas firs. We need to have a proper woodland strategy emerging out of council too.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Phil.
Only briefly on this, and I think what I was interested in looking at different options around biodiversity was about roadside verges. And Wiltshire Council's had since 1970 a protected verge scheme. It currently funds it to the tune of £0, and it's used by volunteers. There are 50 of these around the county at the moment. And one thing I take from that is there is already a number of ideas sitting either in the council or within voluntary groups within the county already. So rather than having to reach for some new, actually it's probably about rediscovering some very traditional ways and bringing them back into the fold again, and offering up as I think in terms of coming to the chat, a sense of leadership to say, what is that we've got and where can we support it best? We don't have to come up with some complicated new schemes. We've actually got an officer at County Hall responsible for protected verge schemes, but gets no funding and has to rely on volunteers to look after them. We could massively increase biodiversity through a permacultural approach, which allows protected verges to flourish much more widely across the county in a relatively straightforward way. And we've already got some of that infrastructure set up already. And I think that's probably one of those ways where we don't need to put in some complex systems. Actually, we just need to work out who have we got already working with us, what are those ideas, and how we can bring that into play. And I think that's where the role of the councillors are, to offer that sense of leadership and direction and kind of cut through and say what happens. I think that there's some real opportunities there from the ideas here, and the role of the councillors to make sure to bring them into action.
Great, thank you. Christine, comments from the floor, please.
We've just got a couple of comments back from some of the candidates. So Alan has said we've tried to get trees planted on the housing association sites, but they've refused to do it on the grounds of cost. So he's suggesting legislation to ensure additional tree planting is built into all planning applications, and to incentive land owners to set aside land for tree planting. And Derek's come back with a suggestion which kind of fits in with quite a few comments about cultural change as well, that we need to create a fashion for rather more rough and ready gardens and public areas than expecting perhaps the completely manicured lawns that so many people seem to go for.
Yeah, good. I mean, again, I'm struck, I must say, by the degree of consensus between everybody here. So, and I do hope, you know, that that's carried through into the new council, whoever is elected on this. Right, next question, covering a sort of similar sort of area, land use. Christine.
Yeah, it's similar area, but with a slightly different focus. What can be done locally to increase the availability of land for allotments and community gardens to enable more food to be grown locally and to add to facilities for improved mental health and to encourage more local tree planting? I think we've kind of talked about the tree planting quite a bit in the last one, so maybe if we stick to the allotments and community gardens ideas.
Yeah, good point, yes. Okay, Ruth, it's you to kick off.
I am here. I don't seem to be on the video, so I don't know what's going on.
I can hear you fine.
Okay. Corsham actually is fairly well provided for as far as allotments are concerned. Those that are rented out are inspected annually to ensure that they're being used and maintained. And where it's found that they've fallen into disuse, I think I found the problem, where they've fallen into disuse, without reasonable explanation, then the lease is not renewed. However, there is still an unmet demand. New ones will be coming into service on the Park Lane development. On a piece of ground, the developer has been refused permission to develop because of bat flight paths. These fallow areas, from the point of view of the house builder, should be built into every development. Again, we are fortunate to have 2 community gardens, thanks to Transcoco, but there could be more. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the intransigence of Wiltshire Council Estates Department to bring into service the land at the rear of Mansion House. No justifiable explanation and poor engagement. I will continue to campaign on this and similar issues if I'm elected. And the Mansion House, if I am elected, will be in my division. So watch this space. There is a lot of land, a lot of open space owned by housing associations. The housing associations need to be engaged with in order to provide allotments and gardens. Whether these remain under the ownership of the housing association or are transferred to the town or county needs to be explored. The one thing I would say is it needs to be demonstrable that there's a demand for such facilities in the immediate locality, as the worst thing that can happen will be that they're not used or maintained because there's little local appetite to become involved. So it's about not just engaging with the landowners, whether that's town, county, housing association, but also with the locals, so that they are actually as a groundswell of support. So not just providing and hoping they come.
Great, thank you, Ruth. I'll just read out Ray's response here. So in my 4 years on the Corsham Town Council, I've totally agreed with the high priority that's been given to protect and enhance our 6 recreation areas and green spaces, and will continue to support this as a county councillor. I'm also aware there's an ongoing issue with the current availability of land for allotments. Although Corsham is fortunate to have roughly 100 allotments, the waiting list remains long. If elected, I would push for Wiltshire Council to encourage local landowners to identify land that could be leased and used for additional allotment sites and community gardens. As well as encouraging locally grown food on allotments and home gardens, I'll back the Wealth of Wiltshire scheme, which is similar to the New Forest Mark, which is an emerging initiative which will support local farmers and help contribute to the reduction of food miles. Where possible, I will also continue through personal example to encourage people to buy local and choose vegetables that are in season. A vital part of any environmental plan is planting trees. Well, we talked about the trees, so I won't cover that again, but it is keen on trees. But need to be carefully considered in the context of potential land requirements for renewable energy projects while continuing to preserve wildlife, biodiversity and habitat. Okay, and next up is Brian. Do you have another policy on this, Brian?
No, but I'm going to quote from Professor James Lovelock, the climate scientist, and in his book, Gaia, A Final Warning, he pointed out that during World War II, allotments were 4 times as productive as farmland for producing crops than farms because of the care that people put in to their allotments with the use of more and better compost and better watering. But there are 2 problems. Firstly, go to many allotments and you will find vacant plots. So we need to start with the schools and education. Where there's a perceived need for allotments, then people will use them and more land can be turned over to them. Secondly, there's the legal restriction that's contained in the Allotments Act 1922. Wonder how many people knew about that, whereby there is a general prohibition on any trade or business being conducted on the allotment or garden or any part thereof. So allotment gardens can't operate as market gardens or nurseries. So we need to lobby our MPs for a change in the law. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Sheila's statement, Christine.
Sheila says, during the COVID-19 restrictions, setting up community projects is difficult, but not impossible. I installed a polytunnel in my garden for my family and the neighbours. We all donated seed plants for everyone to share. We abided by the government guidelines for allotments and had a strict rota with hand gel at the entrance. Only one family was allowed in at a time. I would encourage other people with space to do the same. I would also encourage people to use their local shops and support the local farmers who provide local produce. A seed and plant swap is also a method of sharing good practice and can easily be set up using social media, the parish magazines and posters. If they have a small garden, they can grow flowers to attract wildlife and some vegetables in between the flower for their personal use. I successfully encouraged Box PC to support a group of residents who are in discussion with the landowner about the possibility of purchasing the remaining part of Quarry Woods for the community. If successful, it will be a great benefit for the parishes in the area for daily exercise, mental health and well-being, and supporting the wildlife, especially the bats, and protecting the trees in our village.
Okay, great. Derek, next.
Well, again, it seems like, you know, pretty much all my points have been mentioned. I particularly liked Brian's aspects of the education side of things. I was up in Rudloe and I was quite impressed with somebody with a very small garden, but out in front, he got these wonderfully constructed raised beds with netting on all sides, and you know, that kind of thing. But people don't do that if they feel underconfident. So we need to bring it through from the education, not just to the children in schools, but also outside schools as well. So people basically feel that despite having relatively small amount of land, they can still do something with it, which was the point made that about how much food was created during the war from allotments. And going back to the other one was Helen mentioned, you know, food miles, and also the fact that if the allotments are not close to where people live, so in a sense there should be a criteria that you can't use an allotment unless you can walk there. you know, that sort of thing, because otherwise you don't want to have people driving from one place to another in order to go and, you know, work on an allotment. But, you know, I'd want to be a little bit careful about that, because that could be disadvantaging people who live in the centre of a town. So you'd have to work on that one. Anyway, I think great ideas, everyone.
Thank you. Great. Declan, please.
Yes, again, so a lot of my points already made. I'll just touch briefly on mine, but people have already mentioned allotments that were used during the Second World War. There was an enormous campaign undertaken by the UK government to encourage people to grow their own food, which was done to try and ease the UK's reliance on imports in the wake of the German blockade. The campaign urged people to plant their own victory gardens wherever possible. And to do this, they provided all citizens with free information on how to grow crops. They gave out free packets of seeds, and they had communal tool sheds where people could borrow gardening equipment for free. The challenge we face today with stopping climate change is arguably even bigger than the task faced during the Second World War. Although we will need to use different methods to beat this new menace, we can embrace old community values and local projects to come together and help each other learn to embrace a new sustainable world. The council needs to be the presence to invoke a wave of self-sustainability, so we must give people the tools to improve their own lives. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Helen, next, please.
Yeah, very brief. I mean, this is the point where I was going to raise what Brian raised in the last question, which was the 25% tree coverage on new developments. And I think we should really look again at doing that, because fruit trees are trees. So you could quite easily then say to a developer, well, allocate a piece of the plot for a community orchard on your new development. Part of the issue there is who's going to maintain it. And some of these projects are very much driven by individuals, and when they get ill or lose interest, suddenly the project dies. So there does need to be work to make sure that projects like these are sustainable and have a long-term future and not reliant on individuals. And that's where groups like Transcoco, again, because it's a solid group with a long pedigree, can be very useful in educating other groups about how they've maintained their presence for such a long time.
Yeah, good. Okay, Phil Chamberlain, please.
Thank you. Yes, well, I think this is where I think it'd be useful for Wiltshire to show some leadership. Firstly, I'd have an audit of the estate of Wiltshire Council currently, with the presumption that large areas of concrete sitting idly doing nothing are not helping anybody at all. And that may address some of the issues I think there's Ruth said about the Mansion House, where what is it able to wild its own estate and provide that sort of set of wild gardens and food growing across the county, and make a presumption that it should be brought into use in that way rather than sitting as some asset that may in the future be built on or sold off or drawn upon. So I think Wiltshire can provide its own set of places down. I think I would also would also encourage a culture of that is what we should be doing with the assets within the county, thinking about how to make use of them that way, and it will help drive that sort of culture that within the council. And I think if we were going to be looking at dealing with developers, that would be one of the sort of harder arguments to have. The easier thing is to get the council's house in order first, and then perhaps work with its closest neighbours, either within the emergency services for the fire brigade or the police, and with the educational authority as well, in terms of looking at their estate and where it might be able to wild their estate as well. There's an attitude of, if I've got a concrete asset, I don't want to do anything with it, but actually if it's sitting there doing nothing, we may have the opportunity to wild quite a bit in a number of interesting areas without having to think about building, without having to buy, say, large areas of tracts for new allotments. And I think, again, it would encourage a culture of thinking differently about the things that the council own, which really holds only in trust for the residents.
Yeah, good point. Alan, finally.
1 second. Yeah. With reference to Corsham, Wiltshire Council has land, which we all know about, which is the behind the digital hub, and that really should be turned into a community garden. It's large and enclosed, and it should be the town mental health garden, and it should involve sensory, and it should involve basically it's a mental health garden, and it should be funded. It should be funded, because if it's not funded, then it all dies the death. And there's an excellent starting point, which is a company called Thrive, who've done this in Reading, and there's no reason why we couldn't use the doctor's surgery to basically use it as a prescription service. So Wiltshire Hub should be turned into the Wiltshire Digital Hub should be turned into a health and welfare garden. And as an allotment holder, I'm well aware of the benefits that bring with the allotments, but we've got allotments that aren't being used and utilised because they haven't got water, they haven't got security issues. So we need to address that. And finally, with community gardens, and we looked at community gardens, one of the problems is if we don't have a key person working with them, it all falls apart. And I would suggest a better way of doing this, particularly with the new communities, is on the new estates, we sort of run gardening clubs to help and advise people who are interested in tending their own areas. And this would make the entire estate a community garden rather than have this core fund thing. And the advantage of doing this is the gardeners would own their space. And I think it would be far more beneficial and a long-term project than just have this community garden, which frankly will die. So essentially that's it. Sorry.
I mean, you may not be aware, but Transcoco worked very hard on that, using that space behind the digital mention as exactly the purpose that you talked about, a sort of community garden with sort of mental health aspects and wellbeing aspects. And I must say, with very strong support from the most recent area board members, but it did, as someone mentioned, I forget who now, it ran into problems with Wiltshire Council officers who just sort of basically vetoed it without any further discussion. So maybe it is something we can revive with.
I think so. It's such a perfect counterpoint of the town, and it makes no sense not to do it. So we will do it. In theory.
Comments from everybody else?
There was just what you were saying, Jane made the comment about she'd had really good support for that community garden, the idea of a community garden, and that it was the Wiltshire Council who held it all up and blocked it.
Yeah. Okay, right, final question, then we can open up briefly for sort of any open questions. So the final question, I'll read that because I'm going first with Ray Lavar's answer, in fact. So the final question was, what steps will you personally take, if elected, to ensure the council takes decisive action on climate change? So this is what Ray has to say. In a global context where the UK is 0.85 of the world population, any prospective councillor who claims they can ensure Wiltshire Council takes decisive action on climate change is naive at best and disingenuous at worst. If I'm successful, my task will be to understand, prioritise and champion a wide range of issues, including climate change, that are important to the electorate of Corsham and Ladbroke. I certainly can't speak for the 500,000 people in Wiltshire or the 65 million people in the UK, let alone the rest of the world. As with the Wiltshire local plan, any proposals I support will need to be realistic, affordable, appropriate to local needs and deliverable. Furthermore, although the environment is one of my key priorities, I consider it to be one of many policy areas I'll be faced with in the event I get elected. Prior to this occurring, I do not wish to make any empty promises or virtue signaling that I am in no position to influence or deliver. On an individual basis, however, I will continue to reduce my family's impact on the environment. To name but a few includes no flying since 2017, buying a low emission car, increasing cycling and walking, reducing meat consumption and maximising all recycling opportunities. In the event I'm elected, I think it's crucial to set an example that others may follow. Thank you, Ray. Next up is Brian. Still with us, Brian? Yep.
Yeah, good. Well, when I wrote the climate emergency motion, sorry, back to the issue of those things, with Extinction Rebellion back in 2019, I suggested the formation of a task group. And this was done, and a small department was created with specialist officers to work out ways in which not just Wiltshire Council, but the county of Wiltshire as a whole could become climate neutral. This work needs to continue, and the recommendations that both from the task group and the specialist department together need to be listened to, taken seriously and implemented. The whole UK needs to generate more renewable energy. Currently, Wiltshire generates electricity from solar that displaces around 300,000 tonnes of CO2 each year. but we could be generating so much more. Wind power, for example, is exploited in counties surrounding Wiltshire, in Somerset, in Gloucestershire, in Oxfordshire, in Berkshire, and in Dorset. Why not here in Wiltshire? Put simply, it's because of the current bias against it in the current administration. Some interesting figures that the UK needs. It currently needs 0.25 terawatts of power at any one time for everything. That's heat, industry, transport, lighting, the lot. The wind power potential of the UK alone is estimated to be 2 terawatts. But there's also solar, there's hydro, and there's tidal and wave power, and the last two have hardly been touched. In terms of heating our homes, a lot's been said about both air and ground source heat pumps. These work, but they're very expensive to purchase, even with the now ended government grants. So I was really pleased to hear of the new British invention, the microwave boiler. These are expected to be rolled out by 2024 and will cost around the same as a gas or oil powered boiler, so around £3,500 a unit. And with 95% efficiency, they're expected to cost around the same as fossil fuel boilers do at the moment to operate. Of course, insulation is number one to reducing the energy that we use. Not only do we need to see new houses built to the very best insulation standards, but we need to see how we can promote good insulation in our existing housing stock, be that owned by social housing, housing associations, or in private hands. And that's that. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Brian. Christine, Sheila's
Sheila's statement says, I hope I'm elected so I can ask to sit on the Climate Change Committee again, so that I can continue the work I was previously doing in 2015, which was to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions in the county. I was part of a committee on recycling and how it could be implemented to allow all households to start recycling their waste instead of putting it into landfill. At that time, Wiltshire Council was declared the most climate-friendly council in England by Friends of the Earth because of our work. A small step to what needs to still be done, but I'm proud of the work this committee and I have achieved.
Oh, okay, right. Derek.
Okay, the first thing that I would do is to propose a carbon metric that would be measured, and I would expect the Chief Financial Officer to be responsible for that. I did notice that when I looked at the financial statement, I saw, well, maybe I was missing it, but I saw nothing that was at the high level that was suggesting that climate change was anything to be mentioned or was a driver for any actions. So that's the first thing I do. I take your point, Brian, about these microwave boilers. Great stuff. But one of the problems I think we're going to have is whether or not we can deliver the fabric of the network to deliver enough power for that. And I think that there's also a project that feeds hydrogen into the gas network at the moment, with the potential prospect of having hydrogen boilers, which would be, in fact, actually possibly just require a change in the burner and the flame indicator. Anyway, I think there are a few areas there on the on heating homes that have yet to be ironed out. I would work with all sections of the council and councillors to take positive action and positive decisions. Okay, as we all know, we've run out of time here. We've got to get on with it. So let's work out our policies and get on. And I'd certainly look at no new road building except in exceptional circumstances, and a real focus on reducing the actual carbon content within new building. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Declan, please.
Well, I'm sick to death of hearing more and more about our need to cut down as individuals when the biggest polluters, the worst of the climate criminals, are big businesses and major industrialists that do nothing but feed the flames of the climate emergency. They love to shift the blame of their actions onto the common person, to take the brunt away from the fact that 71% of greenhouse emissions globally are caused by 100 organisations. And I promise that if elected, I will do everything in my power to stop the injustice of greedy industrialists poisoning your community with new dirty developments and unclean roadways. I will make sure that we invest in renewable energy, we improve public transport routes and accessibility. I'll make sure that there are connective cycleways and bike paths free for all to use across the county, to connect every town and village and strip our reliance on the car. I'll create low pollution areas in towns, which will someday transition into car-free zones. We will build a safe space for ecosystems within our community to protect nature for future generations to come. Every single member of my community who does not vote for a Green candidate will be consciously and deliberately voting against a better future for their community and a better life for their children. Give me your vote and I promise that while I'm your representative, Wiltshire will have clean air to breathe, fresh water to drink and healthy soil to stand on. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you, Declan. Helen.
Thanks, Adam. You've heard almost all of this in previous contributions from myself, because you're asking what would I do. So I would push for installation of renewables on all council properties, and that also includes elements of power storage, not just generator. I'd push for improvements to public transport, looking at options to more frequent services, for potentially smaller services, for services which integrate with local villages, not just town centres. I would push for a biodiversity survey at the outset, and then work to develop a plan on how we improve it and how we measure that improvement. I would encourage extending the broadband network out from the current boundaries from the GigaClear installation to move to places like the Copenhagen development and other villages around. I would ensure that we work effectively with neighbouring councils on issues such as Corsham Station and the clean air zones. And finally, I would want to give our planning department teeth, so it's prepared to stand up to developers and impose the policies that we want rather than rolling over. And I'm pleased that the council has stood up to the developers on the Gladman development.
Thank you. Yeah. Phil Chamberlain, please.
Thank you, Adam. I've changed my answer on this actually from what I was originally going to say as a result of the discussion and debates over the last couple of hours. And the reason for that is that if elected, I don't intend to come back in 4 years' time and say there were a whole load of things that were really, really interesting and absolutely nothing happened. Because actually the number of really, really interesting ideas have been suggested through different councillors here, but actually what stops those being implemented? Where's the attempt at a structural change and a change in attitude and mindset by the council which says we will make it happen? What is to stop any of these ideas actually just running into the sand again? Why can you have something like the Mansion House idea, which in itself seems so sensible, but actually just be vetoed? So the thing I would do if elected is I will not accept no for an answer. That's it. Everything else is a great idea. I will work with other people, but too often I think we are bogged down in a structural process which says it's too complicated or expensive, or we're going to wait for central government, or I don't want a virtue signal. I want a virtue signal. I want to signal that it is not acceptable to come back in 4 years and say, I had a great idea about boilers and nothing happened about it. So my answer will be that councillors will do as mandated by the elected people elected from here as well, who've agreed it as a climate emergency. And we will not accept that we cannot do things that will improve future generations. And I'm not going to accept that it's someone else's responsibility. That's what I'll be doing every day.
Great, thank you. Okay, where are we? Alan, next, please.
1 second. Yeah, from my point of view, on a personal level, my commitment is to the residents of Corsham. And that's what my main aim is to ensure we improve the footpaths, the cycling, the road crossings, to introduce the on-demand buses to encourage cycling, and to reduce the speed limits. We are told at the moment we cannot reduce the speed limits from Cross Keys to Copenhagen because of highway legislation. And that, frankly, is nonsense. It is absolutely ridiculous. We're allowing guidelines to actually denigrate people's lives, and it has to be overseen. And it's small actions in our environment and in our small community, which from my point of view is far more beneficial than big national pictures, because we can't legislate for that, but we can do things like reduce speed limits, we can do things like improve footpaths, and we can do things like just make things a little bit more accessible to people, rather than continually make excuses and not do anything, which I think is totally unacceptable. There you go.
Thank you. And finally, Ruth. Ruth?
Sorry, yeah, sorry, I am here. I was having a bit of a technical issue. So the questions as to what I will personally do, well, that depends on the overall outcome of the election. If the Lib Dems take control, which I hope they do for many reasons, not least of which the climate emergency, then I'll work with my colleagues to implement our manifesto, which has the environment at its heart. If the Conservatives retain control, then I will continue to hold them to account, not be assuaged by honey words and inaction. And I will, through overview and scrutiny structure, ensure that words equate to actions, and that complacency is not allowed to go unchallenged. After May the 6th, what I want to see is a can-do council, not one that emphasises the difficulties in order to conceal a lack of determination. Regardless if I am of how the election at Wiltshire Council turns out, if I'm personally elected, I will continue to work closely with Transcoco, which I've done since its inception, in what sometimes I'd like to refer to as the People's Republic of Corsham, to make us the greenest, most environmentally friendly town in Wiltshire. And in answer to Phil's, or as a response to one of Phil's comments, I've never accepted no for an answer. That doesn't mean I've always achieved, but I've never accepted no for an answer, and I have no intention of ever doing so when that no is absolutely unsustainable without merit.
Thank you, Ruth. And certainly, I think Transcoco would very much share that ambition to make Corsham the greenest in Wiltshire, although we'd like to make everywhere in Wiltshire the greenest in Wiltshire as well.
I'm only focusing on Corsham.
Absolutely. No, that's a really good point to finish on. It's 9 o'clock, so I think we'll just wrap up very quickly. Any reactions from the floor to basically to anything that people have heard? Has anything else come through on chat or anything, Christine? Or
so it's a shame we don't have time for questions. There was a question about renewable energy and domestic heating that we didn't manage to get back to. No. Which was slightly touched on, but I think it's maybe something interesting for the candidates to think about is the sort of group of questions that have come through about behavioural, cultural, structural change within the council to be able to lead to policies that actually help us through this. And we started to touch on it just then, and also the question of if you're in that leadership position, how are you going to manage that leadership position when potentially you're going to be pushing through policies which are going to be unpopular to large numbers of the population as well as other councillors? So I think we'll have to leave those as food for thought.
Yes. Just finally, from people who've been listening in, any final comments or reactions you'd like to make to what you've heard tonight?
Maybe I'll say something, Adam.
Yes, please do,
yeah. Well, of course, it's been incredibly interesting to hear everybody, but it's quite a big undertaking, and I don't think even the Green candidates haven't quite grasped what it entails. We're all very keen on renewable energy. We all keep talking about it, but logically, if you look at the the situation in Britain as a whole. It can't happen in the cities because it's very space intensive. It's got to happen in the countryside. That means a place like Wiltshire has got to provide not only its own requirements for electricity, but it's got to be able to export because it's got to be able to support the cities. That's colossal. That's colossal. It's a lot, and it will totally change the character of the county. That's what needs to happen. And you've got to do the sums, you've got to sit down there, you've got to have committees, you've got to be working all these. Of course, the Tories will say, no, we're not going to do that. We like the old ways. Well, fair enough. You've got to have these big battles, but we need to acknowledge this is what it's going to take. And it's exactly the same with biodiversity. It's pretty revolutionary. It's got nature needs half. Think about that, what that entails for farming and things like that. So there's some big things that need to be done if we are going to achieve the sustainability goals. And at least they should be stated, even though we actually never get around to doing it. Enough from me.
Yeah, I certainly hear what you say, Peter. And if for those who don't know, Peter is a sort of expert and academic in the environmental movement. So he's not just talking out of his orifice. Any other final comments from anybody? No. Let me just finish. I thank you very much to all of our candidates, including those who contributed written answers. I think it was a very, very interesting debate. We will record this. It'll be available to on our website when I manage to get around to sort of putting it all up there and everything. And the comments, we'll save those as well. I do see this as not the end of a dialogue, but the beginning of a new dialogue with whoever does get elected. And as I said at the beginning, Transcoco has worked right from the beginning of the unitary council and the area boards with the area board. We have always seen it as a key focus to work in partnership with whoever's elected there, and we will continue to do so. And actually, one of the ideas that Wiltshire Climate Alliance has put to Wiltshire Council, which has been, again, unanimously accepted, is that every area board should have a climate change working group, which, rather like the working groups we have around transport and so on, which engages with community groups and other interested parties to focus the area boards on climate change issues. So that, which I think is widely accepted within Wiltshire Council, should be implemented after the election. So those of you who are successful in the election, you will be involved in and see that working group on every agenda for the area boards, and we intend to be fully involved in that. So we'll see you there. And I think there was, in terms of comments, I think there was a good level of consensus, particularly around things like the transport, on housing, on biodiversity, on the allotments and land use stuff. I obviously a little bit of hesitation from some speakers around the topic of climate change itself. And I think perhaps that's more to do with maybe understanding of the implications. I'd hope it's that rather than resistance to the concept of climate change. And that's something we can work on with you and help to educate everybody on those issues to the extent that there's a lack of understanding on that. Okay, brilliant. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you all felt that was sufficiently apolitical and consensus building, and there wasn't any political bias from anyone. Well, certainly not from anyone, myself or Christine or anybody else involved. So if there was, let me know. You've all got my email address and I will deal with it offline. So thank you very much. Appreciate the audience for staying with us, and see you all around, no doubt, very soon. Thank you very much, everyone.
I'm sure I could speak on behalf of all the candidates, Adam, to say thank you very much for facilitating this in this particular context. But actually, my thanks goes out to you and Transcoco in a wider arena, because as you've said, you've been working on these sort of issues for 10 years. And I take my hat off to you and your colleagues, because you've persevered through thick and thin. And again, if I refer to Phil, his comments about not taking no for an answer, and you haven't. and you've achieved. And I'm really, really happy that you're based in Corsham.
Thank you. Well,
Yeah.
Adam, can you hear me? I haven't got a little hands up thing.
I can, Phil, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as a former chair of the area board, I mean, I've welcomed the relationship we've had with Transcoco. It's been a healthy one. It's been a positive one. We've made some good progress, and I just hope that whoever is elected will continue in that very constructive, positive relationship we've had in the past.
I really appreciate that, Phil. That's very kind of you to say so. And I certainly agree. It has been very constructive, and I'm confident it will continue to be so with whoever is elected next time. So great. Thank you all. And I say, look forward to seeing you on the other side. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.